Did you know this man is linked to Donald Trump, a huge revival on a tiny island, and even to a house that was shook by God himself? Duncan Campbell is the man who people say brought revival to the Isle of Lewis from December 1949 to 1953. There is a whole story behind how Duncan Campbell arrived on the Isle of Lewis, and we're going to come back to that. But first is all you need to know is he began a mission in the parish church in Barvis in December 1949. And at first it was only meant to be a short visit, but he felt that something grand and glorious was about to happen, and that led him to cancel all other engagements and remain on the island for the glory of God. So let's consider what sparked this great move of the Spirit in 1949. At that time, the Isle of Lewis was experiencing a spiritual decline. Religion was prevalent, and many parents raised their children to fear God. They were taught the catechisms in schools, and yet very few young people attended church. There's actually a story of a local minister who even considered closing the midweek prayer meeting just because it was so poorly attended. One night there was only 2 people who were present, and the minister was on the verge of ending the meeting for good and saying, "We're going to close it tonight," but he just didn't have the courage that night. He hesitated, and then the following week the number doubled to 4 to 5 people, but it was still discouraging and he still felt he should shut it down, but he couldn't do it that night. Despite this, he decided to have another prayer meeting the following week, and what happened? Revival broke out, and soon those meetings were filled with souls pleading for salvation and interceding before the Lord. And this serves as a lesson for all of us. It is easy to give up, but we must persevere. As you know, Duncan Campbell is the preacher who's often associated with the revival, but he himself would credit it to 2 elderly sisters, Christina and Peggy Smith, for their prayers. These women, both in their 80s, couldn't attend church, so they turned their home into a place of prayer where ministers would join them. They longed to see young people coming to Christ, and because of their prayers and their keenness, 7 church leaders were moved for themselves to gather in a barn and pray for revival. Initially it was difficult. They prayed for months with little to show for it, but as time went on, they noticed little lights on in the other houses, with other people in the community also beginning to pray, longing for God to visit them. Another remarkable event occurred at 4 a.m. one morning when 700 people gathered outside a police station because they had heard that one police officer had been saved and they wanted to meet him. Some were so overwhelmed with concern for eternal matters that they literally lay in the road crying out for God to have mercy on them. One night during a dance at a village hall, a conviction of sin suddenly spread across the whole dance hall, and all of the young people present began to be scared. They all ran out of the hall, leaving behind all of the revelry, and they went straight into a revival meeting. And this is a meeting where Duncan Campbell was preaching. And apparently there were so many of them that Duncan Campbell couldn't even get to the pulpit through the crowds because they were all there crowding in this church building. I'm in a tiny little village called Tong in the Isle of Lewis, and this house right behind me has huge significance, especially if you're American. An intriguing story for American listeners involves a young teenage boy called Donald from the Isle of Lewis, and he played a significant role in the revival. This boy also had a cousin named Mary Ann Smith MacLeod, who's related to those 2 prayer warriors, Peggy and Christina Smith, who I told you about before. At 17 years old, Mary Ann MacLeod left the Isle of Lewis and went all the way over to New York. But there she married a young man called Fred, and they had 4 children, the youngest of whom they named after this cousin of theirs, Donald. Who was it? Donald Trump. The 2 elderly women, knowing that their niece Mary Ann was in America, decided to send her a Bible that had been used in the revival. This Bible was well worn and very significant, and so here it was with Mary Ann. When she got older, she decided to give it to her son, Donald Trump, who later became president, and he kept that Bible in the Oval Office, and it is said that he used it during his oath of office, placing it on top of another Bible. It's a small world, isn't it? But the same question that arose in the hearts of those during the Lewis revival is one I wish we would ask ourselves today, and it's this: we should pray to the Lord, "Will you visit us, Lord?" Because the Lord did for those in Lewis, and I pray he'll do it again for us.
Let me quote the same passage from the Bible I read on Saturday from 1 John chapter 4. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and His love is made complete in us, all of us.
This is my son.
Made complete in us. Imagine what our country could accomplish if we started working towards one people, under one God, saluting one flag.
You were a good son.
It's time to break with the bitter failures of the past and to embrace
and I have prepared you for this time, for such a time as this. You have been groomed and prepared for this kind of battle.